What I have done in organizing the reading, let me just go back to the syllabus. We've done a few, a little bit of work chronologically, some of the earlier works, 1985, as Obiasekari. And then we're sort of jumping to the present from then. Not exactly, not like last year, but all of this would be considered contemporary work. Maybe not Foucault, we're going back in time for him a little bit, but basically work that is not about the history of the field, but about where it is now. So Anxious China, it's a really intriguing book. I've actually it's one of the books I've wanted to teach, but there's always, maybe those of you who are teachers have the same experience. You can't include everything. There's so I've only ever used a chapter, but it's a very intriguing book. Here, let me just put the publisher's page. It's an interesting cover too. All these Chinese earl's braids. And by the way, University of California Press, I don't know if you are all up on the publishers. Probably useful for me to point out, the University of California Press is a really important press in academic publishing. Within this field, medical anthropology, anthropology. The last book I had up there was Duke University Press. That's that's probably the most trendy one right now, at least for anthropologists. And for some other areas like literary criticism and queer studies and a number of other topics that are trendy. Duke is the. If you go to a conference like the American Anthropological Association, the booksellers are there with these tables, selling the books, but also you can go speak to an editor, an acquisitions editor, about proposing your book proposal to them. And it's always most difficult to get to the Duke editor. He's always like, somebody's with him and you're waiting for a chance for him when he's free, you want to be able to get in there, and there's 3 other people waiting at the same time to try to. There's a few presses like that. So, Duke, California, Princeton University Press, and so just want to, do notice the publication sources. It's of course a different publication scene in India, but some of these presses do overlap, and some like Sage Press is here, as well as in many other places in the world. This book is about Western psychotherapy in China. Let me start out by pointing out regarding ethnography and how you do it. Ethnography is something you do as a method. Not a terribly formalized method, but we'll learn more about it. A style of research which is really just about being in people's presence. And not just interviewing, but your observations from hanging around. But ethnography also is a form of writing. Ethnography is this book. We have chapter 6, Crafting a Self from Anxious China. Anxious China is an ethnography. And that part of what makes it an ethnography is not just how she did the research, hanging out with these people you see described in chapter 5, and doing these psychotherapy workshops with them. You remember, like she did the sand therapy workshop with the policeman, and so she's very involved directly. I guess she must have been participating herself in the same workshop, which is part of ethnographic work. But also look at how she writes the chapter. So the very beginning, on a warm summer afternoon in 2009, amid light rain, I met Miss Zhu Ling, a part-time therapist in her early 40s at a tea house near Green Lake in in Kunming. After a mutual friend introduced us via phone, I set up the meeting immediately. Zhu was a tall and slender woman with long dark hair and a pair of big inquisitive eyes. She arrived before me and had already ordered a pot of green tea for us. As we sat down in the comfortable bamboo chair sipping the refreshing tea from small ceramic cups, Zhu began to tell me about her encounter with psychological counseling and subsequent personal transformations. And then you have the quotation. So she's setting up the scene. You know, part of ethnography is writing about the place and the feeling. You know, in a way, you're writing somewhat like a novelist. You're trying to evoke the sense of being there, which you don't see in more traditional scientific writing. There are sometimes, actually, I've been on the doctoral committee for a few psychology students, and sometimes they'll mention an informant. They'll just say, you know, Mary said this about her problems, and I always want to say, who is Mary? You know, where did you meet her? You know, what were the conditions of getting to know her? And you know, there's just kind of these people appear out of the blue. And in ethnographic writing, you want to set the scene. You know, you want to be able to see the anthropologist encountering the person in a real setting. And why we do this? I mean, maybe partly it's just more interesting storytelling, but also I think you learn things from this. You know, in a way, if you want to really understand the situation, you want to know the circumstances under which people are being interviewed. You know, is it in this tea shop in a very casual manner? You want to understand how the interviewee might be perceiving the interviewer, what their relationship might be like, because all of these things affect what people say and how they say things. As she says, actually, since I still have this up here, it's the top part. Actually, let me just get the page number here for those who are online. So that quote I just read was from the first page of the article, the very beginning, page 112. And at the top of 113, she says this chapter examines how psychological training and therapeutic interventions play a vital part in the Chinese urban middle class project of self-making. I explore how the Chinese notion of the self, Ji Wo, I don't know how one pronounces that, is turned into an object of intense inquiry, and how various therapeutic projects are used to achieve self-development and personal fulfillment in the current context. By therapeutic self, I specifically mean a different sense of self emerged in the process of one's therapeutic encounters. Okay, this is something anthropologists also typically do, invent terminology. You know, the therapeutic self is her label for the kind of the self that she sees people cultivating in China. You know, and the anthropologists also, I guess, part of ethnographic writing, you know, I explore how the Chinese notion of self, here you have the Chinese word that people were using, that she's translating as self, and that's, you know, what we feel you always need to do. I mean, the words for self have different meanings in different languages. In fact, in one of my articles, I wrote about the language of the self and the mind and consciousness that I was hearing from people who at mental hospitals that we'd interviewed. You know, a term like Atman. You know, Atman is a different concept of the self. You know, you don't have an English language in equivalent. You know, Atman is the transcendent self. You know, according to Shankara, we misrecognize ourself as the common sense self, and then we learn how to recognize our true self as Atman. I mean, we can translate that into English as true self or something like that. You know, but the vocabulary of self is something that varies. And so Ji Wo in Chinese, I mean, she talks about the concept of self further, but that's something that we're not going to take the word self for granted when she describes that as the focus of her. So one of her points in this piece, in this chapter from her book, is she's trying to show us how Western psychology plays out in China. And many scholars have claimed that Western psychology is individualistic. You know, it's, you perceive of the individual, the self, as separate from their society. And the critique of that psychology is that people aren't really that way. Even in the West, you know, the West is an individualistic society. I would say definitely more so than India, but people are very much embedded in their social context and their social connections. It's just it's more like an ideal that motivates certain behavior. But so the expectation is that when psychology is exported around the world, it comes with this message of individualism that people will adopt. You know, it'll be the hegemony of Western culture taking over other places. What does she say here? What in this chapter? What is the interaction with the psychological self presented here? Is it about individualism? Is it about something else?
I don't think it's about individualism. They talk about the social self also,
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship between the therapeutic self, or the personal and the social, and the how it is like very entangled with each other.
Okay. Okay. The individual and the social self are entangled. Yes. Yeah.
Specifically talks about how there is a disentangling at the first, and then that is preceded by a re-embedding.
Right.
So how there is one example that talks about how there was a lot of family issues for a woman, and she went on to Tibet to convert to Buddhism, and she had a personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
And then she didn't cut off from the societal norms or societal aspect of it. She came back to her family with a renewed self, or like rejuvenated self perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
and to reintegrate with her societal identity perhaps.
Okay, yeah, that's well put. In fact, yeah, that's also in this disentangling and re-embedding. Yeah, that's what you're mentioning. That's how she describes her, that these Chinese middle-class people disentangle their self from their, I guess, social entanglements, but then re-embed at the end. You know, the end goal is not the isolation, but how to and I'm wondering actually if that's what psychology offers people in China, a chance to disentangle for a time, not to reject the social self, but to step away from it, perhaps.
First example of the woman who traveled that she mentioned, it's about creating that boundary between personal and
Yes.
social, and to navigate that.
Right.
That is
Yeah, creating a boundary, right?
and
And
able to have her own space and also interact. And I think it mentions how she teaches her daughter with Down syndrome how to have that boundary, but also have a relationship with social. But also another interesting fact that I thought was, they mentioned that when they say social, it's just the close social networks that they have. They don't bring the society at I don't know, a big level. It's the interactions that they have with their family members, close relationships. So that was something that I found very interesting, because when we say social, we think about society as
okay,
well,
right.
but this is the social networks aspect.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it's their sort of family and local community that's the self, right? And they also are suggesting that they can be a better social self after disengaging and then, you know, coming back. That point about how it's not the larger social, though there is a point that I thought was interesting that she does mention later on about, this is from page 123, she says that the parents' generation, of these middle class people, you know, were raised in a more socialist society, and they sought social conformity as their goal, you know, and she's sort of contrasting that. So that it implies that with this generation, there is perhaps maybe less devotion to the state, you might say, in terms of your affect, and yeah, that's a good observation to bring up. Zhu goes to Tibet too, of all places. That's really, I think, quite interesting, which I think has a number of meanings that she doesn't explore here. Let me just move down to where that is. So Where did she go to Tibet? Is that on page 15? Yeah, here we are at the bottom of page 115, the last paragraph. She says, the choice of her destination was not accidental. Tibet, in her and many Chinese and Western people's imaginations, stood for a place of unworldliness and purity. She described this journey as a physical, spiritual, and psychological expedition. So Tibet has this special meaning as a place where you can disengage and find that self, which I would say. I mean, she mentions Chinese and Western. I think to some degree, what this Chinese population is getting with psychology isn't just the Western psychology; it's the Western fetishization of certain places like Tibet as a place where you can find yourself. I mean, Westerners. But politically, it's hard to go to Tibet. So actually, where do people from the West who are trying to find themselves go now if they're going to come to Asia? Dharamshala, yeah, exactly. They go close to Tibet. So I think the Himalayas have become this sort of ideal of a place to. In a way, I think the sort of Western imagination affects, the middle class in India and probably, in China, but probably also in India. Are the Himalayas an idealized place of self-discovery for the Indian middle class too? Is that you're nodding in agreement? Maybe it just is that way. Maybe that just is the place to go where you're going to more effectively find, or maybe it's sort of it became as a product of the imagination of perhaps different people's. Maybe the Western person having read about the Tibetan monks, having read about the rishis, hanging out in the Himalayas. Maybe the urban Indian in Bangalore dealing with, quote, tension and depression might idealize the spaces of the Himalayas.
It's called India syndrome, like when Westerners come to Rishikesh and places like that, like how they create a trance-like state and how they are spiritually evolved. It's called India syndrome.
India syndrome. Oh, okay. And sometimes when I say that I work in India or that I'm going to India, people will often say, oh, have you been to Nepal? Or are you going to go to Nepal while you're there? And I said, well, I don't really have any. India is so huge, it kind of seems like way out of the way to go to Nepal. But Nepal holds this special place in people's imagination, I think, again, because of this ideal. And there's little awareness of India to people. People outside of India, it's just one place. They speak one language, one giant state. and I always say Nepal is like an Indian state. It's like a place with a language, and then you go from one Indian state to another. You find all of these. But anyway, so this is an idealized space. Not just for this Chinese population, but for probably a very global audience. So it's not just this is not just a turn to individualism. And as she also says, it's not the usual neoliberal story, the story of neoliberalism. And I think it's probably good to talk about that term a little bit. I think it's important to understand how we deploy the term neoliberalism today in social theory, and why it would be the term in this article, because it doesn't probably strike some people as psychological. So what is neoliberalism? What do you guys know about this term?
Free markets, which bring in foreign trade and investments.
Okay, free markets. Okay, yeah, and then I would say that probably also what we had before neoliberalism was also free markets. Like how might we say neoliberalism is different from whatever was before? Yeah.
Okay, neoliberalism is actually a product of westernization. So there everything is we will look through the eyes of materialism. So
Okay.
how much we possess, we can increase our status in the society, and we will be judged by how much assets we are holding. So that is what exactly means neoliberalism, but it does make some sense. And in this article, it is mentioned that the middle class it's come within the neoliberalistic ideas, especially in the South Asian countries. The idea of middle classness is a result of neoliberalism,
Yeah.
the consumption, the materialistic possession, how much we are earned, what kind of occupation we are doing in the society, and that kind of materialistic aspects comes under the middle classness. It is defined, the middle class is defined by the materialistic viewpoint.
Okay.
So, the self is, I mean, when I read this article,
Yeah.
I was looking into that social aspect of the self, not the psychological aspect of the self.
Okay.
Because earlier in the initial stage of my research, I was reading on the middle class. So there, the self is a more important aspect of the middle class. The creation of self. The self-actualization. So earlier it was not like that. Especially middle class is constituted with a class society. The class structure is based on the class structure. So earlier the class is constituted with the similar characteristics of people. Those who are having the similar characteristics, they will be as a group. So later with the influence of neoliberalism, everything comes into self. So that's how the self is developed in the neoliberalistic state.
Okay, good. So you've thought a lot about the neoliberalism and the self. That's good.
I was actually looking into work on the middle class.
Okay, right. And yeah, in a way, the middle class, like you're saying, is sort of a product of neoliberalism. Also liberalism too, but neoliberalism maybe in many ways kind of expanded the middle class. And I like that you're pointing to things that are also affect the psyche, of the person in neoliberal society.
The mental health is also become a prominent. It got a prominent importance during the neoliberalism, because earlier it was not considered as the significant need of a person. But after that, it is started to consider as a significant aspect to take care of ourselves.
Oh yeah, take care of yourself. Actually, that is a very neoliberal idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's individualistic, yes, but the bringing in the concept of neoliberalism also reminds us that it's this idea that you are responsible for yourself.
Yes.
The state shouldn't save you, and so that in terms of economic issues and your own position in society, your poverty, is your fault. We might say that the caste system is an older set of ideologies that say the same thing, and neoliberalism is a new set of ideologies that reproduce the same idea that where you are in the social hierarchy is justified because it's all up to what you did. Of course, that also was there in liberalism too. It's like you might ask, how is neoliberalism different from any other period of capitalism? People have written about this, and it's not my area of expertise. But one part of what I understand to be key about neoliberalism is that it's just like capitalism on steroids. There was capitalism. Neoliberalism is also, as I refer to it, the privatization of everything. Liberal capitalism was, some things are private. The state has a certain role. Neoliberalism just tries to push everything a step further and get rid of the state almost completely. Maybe the state will finance the military, and that's it. And everything else can be outsourced to private. And we see that here, right? That's happening. It's happening in the U.S. It's happening in India. It's a global phenomenon. And I think I don't know enough about China. I think to some degree in China too, they have a nominally communist party, but they are very capitalist. Um, and a lot of the global market is driven by the tastes of the Chinese. Like right now, today, French winemakers are processing their wines in a way that the Chinese like, because they're the biggest buyers of French wines. So the Chinese, it's not Mao's China, right? It's a very different thing. Yes.
I want to say that today's national protest is
against
state withdrawal from
Okay.
many of the things. So today there is a national protest in India because of this against neoliberal, what we can consider as neoliberal.
Okay. Right. Okay. Good point. Yeah. Right. It's right here. Yeah. Right.
I would also like to just introduce the word power into it and how power works within neoliberal frameworks is different from the, I think, even something like liberal capitalism. I think there's something different, but I don't know how to word that. Power within neoliberal frames works in a different way where even if we think of an individual psychotherapy, I would be thinking of maybe developing an app and getting a patent for that app so that I keep making money
Right.
in that app's use. I don't know to translate that idea into
Yeah, and maybe there's a way in which technology is also part of this. I feel like the apps, and the online and the AI trends are all part of neoliberalism too, and that tech is not just a part of it. It's very much a driving part of current neoliberalism. It could just be that that's the economic sector that has a lot of effect at this time. Like AI, yeah, I think exactly. That's there are debates over it, and there's people trying to push back against, control it, and then there are those who are trying to, unfetter it and allow it to freely, it does. I mean, we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's not something that's actually in this article as part of neoliberalism, but yeah, if it affects us, it's a state of mind too. It affects how people think in a way that, and she's trying to tell us this is not a typical neoliberal story. So because people have adopted psychology from the West, it doesn't mean that they are now thinking of themselves as individuals, that they are thinking of their social situation or their place in the hierarchy, their level of income, as being due to their own, initiative, and that this totally putting the responsibility on the individual. They haven't taken up that message. In a way, it's kind of like individualism again. She's trying to say that, there's individualism in the psychology, but people still have a social self. Neoliberalism is all part of the same story, really. It's sort of individualism is, again, maybe individualism on steroids is a term for how the psychological side of neoliberalism. Yes?
The importance of self is always there. Because when we grappled the Maslow's hierarchy of need, self-actualization was the peak point. At peak point, it was there early before the neoliberalization. It was there, but with the neoliberalization, it brought more significance, irrespective of any context, because it was only in the West. So after the neoliberalization, it came to the Asian countries also.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And neoliberalism, in a way, kind of lubricated the tracks of cultural influence, around the world. I'm wondering if, what might be your observations about the Indian middle class in terms of these issues? Can you just sort of off the top of your head come up with any ideas about how, like what an analysis like this of the Indian middle class would be about? Because I think you probably are the Indian middle class, if I understand correctly, yeah.
I find a personal difficulty here. I remember the word bourgeois, but I haven't known it in detail, like in academic detail or so. Without knowing that, can I comment about middle class in India?
Yes.
So can I add points?
Sorry?
So can I add on points?
Yeah, okay.
The middle
different in all the Western countries. We cannot come up with a universal definition of what is middle class. We can't define that. Middle class have different kind of notions. It can be social, political, economical, psychological. Everything is included in the middle class.
Okay.
And it is when we say about tell about the Indian context, middle class is more than it is not. It can't be considered as an economic group. It comes the social and cultural aspect into the middle class.
Okay.
So we can't define what is middle class. We can say that those who have a regular employment, like regular wage, and we can define them in the position of their wealth, how much they own, what kind of vehicles they own, what kind of education they are getting. We can define, but we can generalize. We can't generalize that. In rural area, the definition of middle class may be different, and when it comes to the urban setting, it is different. We can't generalize.
Right.
That is the
Yeah.
problem with the middle class.
Oh, sure. And I think there are many layers to the Indian middle class. Yeah.
In the work of Marx, the term petty bourgeoisie is mentioned in the work of Das Kapital.
Yeah.
So we can say that petty bourgeois are maybe middle class, but it does not
Yeah.
include all the aspects of middle class. That concept does not
Right.
include all the aspects of middle class. And Marx didn't pay more attention to the group of petty bourgeois, because he says that they can't generate any products to the society or the markets. They don't possess any wealth, so they gradually will merge into the working class. They can't sustain as an individual entity in the society. That is what Marx observed.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that elaboration on the middle class is a problematic term, of course. Yeah. Mr. Vasudeo, did you have something more to say about your?
Without that, I cannot understand well or comment about neoliberalism in India. Indian middle class. The intuitive response that came to my mind was, intellectually we are neoliberal.
Okay.
But emotionally we may be regressive.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Our rituals, our customs, our expectations,
Yes.
they are interested in retaining the power structure and the hegemony. Like
Okay.
But intellectually we are elite and
That is why
Okay.
we can't separate the culture from the middle class. We can't separate it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's right. Any other ideas about the Indian middle class, or particularly the psychology of it, like all this stuff about the self? Is there a particular therapeutic self that Indian middle class people cultivate? Does it look like the Chinese self?
It also comes with the privilege aspect, I think. Because here, when we're talking
Right.
about, they have the privilege to like take a course for psychotherapy. I mean, take a psychology or psychotherapy course in order to, for themselves, not
Yes.
for others, but
Right.
to realize what they're going through and just to reinvent themselves. But if you're coming to Indian middle class, I don't know if we think about, like sir mentioned, I think we are still in that mental state where we don't think about taking a psychotherapy course in order to better ourselves.
Okay.
We still think of it as something that comes with privilege.
Okay.
That's something.
But seeking out therapy has become like an aspiration of the middle class to make sure that your mental well-being is taken care
yes.
of, all of that.
Right.
But not in terms of like studying a course or anything, but
Right.
seeking out medical options, and like over-medicalization has certainly penetrated into the middle class as well.
Over medicalization. Oh, yes.
One thing
Right.
that they mentioned in this paper itself, the people who are taking the psychotherapy course is they think that it's better economically to take that course than to
Yes,
take
right.
therapy, because it's like,
That's interesting. Yeah.
that's also a smart option.
Right. Yeah. No, I thought that was a very unique observation. Yeah. That taking the course is cheaper than paying for psychotherapy. Several sessions.
We have a lot of quacks already.
Oh, yeah.
We could-
That's true. Yeah.
People who take the psychotherapy course would probably start taking therapy, and I don't think that would be good for the mental health.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, like she said, the aspirations of seeking the therapy
said that the article itself mentioned that the entire growing desire of middle class to something like that. Growing desire of middle class.
Yeah.
So what she said, we can say under that the growing desire.
Mhm.
So like what I said earlier, the middle class is a very fluid and still it's growing. The
Mm.
middle class is still growing.
Right.
So the aspiration is coming from different aspects. So seeking the therapy is also an aspiration of middle class. Maybe in the complex world, the complex working system, working condition, and the complex family relationship, they need that kind of professional assistance
Mhm.
to deal with their problems. That may be.
Is in India is um, the kind of therapies, we'll call them, as people resort to. I wonder if there's more Indian options within the traditions of the guru and the various Indian, I could call it disciplines of the self, yoga. Well, I mean, when I flew into Coimbatore to come here, all these people were going to Satguru, which I guess is some guru retreat, you know. So is that, you know, part of the middle class self? Mm-hmm.
I like to bring in the idea of religion when we come to India.
Mm.
And not religion as just a category where people belong to A, B, C or D. Because these religious groups have been talking to each other for centuries.
Yes.
For example, former student of mine identifies as Muslim, and their marriage was pushed to Chingam. So Kartikagam Chingam is not a concept in Islam.
Yeah, right.
But because they are embedded in the Kerala society and
Right.
there is a residents association, so they thought they will keep it in a month which is considered auspicious in the Hindu calendar.
Yeah.
So this is a big part of our lives here. And it doesn't actually, the guru or the yoga, I think, is for a minority lately.
Oh, yeah.
Vast, and when you look at the number of people in our country, these are, I don't know, yoga or going, I mean, there are spiritual gurus and they are becoming increasingly popular, but by and large, it's your immediate neighborhood and
Yeah, okay.
I think your point is more valid when it comes to the Kerala context, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if you take the Indian context, there is a lot more seeking out gurus and all that.
Okay. Yeah, right.
That's a
Yeah.
segregation.
Kerala is a very different kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
culture.
Very different territory and religiously. Yeah.
I would like to say something that from the therapy point of view, whatever is not provided during parenting, you get a chance to complete and complement that through education or therapy. But now, parents we are devaluing more and more. Education also is being devalued or used only for material, what is the scope kind of thing. So we also measure that also, prospects also in those terms. So we are depending more and more on therapy, which also we will soon devalue. That is my
Okay, right. Well, if we move to the apps, we may devalue it in that way. Yeah.
even otherwise.
Yeah.
Even other, because
Right.
this process all across the society, I suppose it is, and not only in India but also outside. The authority, there is uprising against the authority.
Well, let me shift the conversation. I mean, actually, we could probably go on for a long time about defining the Indian middle class, and but I want to make sure we give enough we already don't have enough time, but that we turn to Stacy Langwick's analysis of an African healer from this chapter called Alternative Materialities. So this is from this book. I actually have the book with me. I was like trying to figure out how many books I should actually try to carry to India. It's a very few, but this one I was already working on: Bodies, Politics, and African Healing, The Matter of Maladies in Tanzania. So this is an American anthropologist who worked in southeastern Tanzania. And in this chapter I gave for you, she's presenting one of her main points. Actually, there's to give you a line from page 153. She refers to somebody else who suggests we give materiality its due. So let's see, where is that? 153. Is the pagination the same? I downloaded the chapter from an ebook. It doesn't do the pagination well. I'm just realizing it just says ebook pages 174 to 197. I was able to download an individual chapter from our library, but it doesn't really tell us well. I have just page 1 of 13, so it doesn't individually number the actual pages, unfortunately. So maybe we should talk about it in a more abstract term. But anyway, on page 153, she discusses, I was looking in my copy, she's citing at the bottom of 152, Margaret Locke, who is a well-known medical anthropologist. She says, if, as Margaret Locke has urged, we are to give materiality its due, then we must allow it the diversity we allow such concepts as agency, history, body, and modernity. So in other words, materiality, we should allow a diversity of understandings of what it is. And in this chapter, you basically have stories of how, women are protecting their children's health. Let me just throw it out there as a general question, like what's going on in this chapter? What did you take away from it? What do you think she's doing?
She's looking at the objectification of knowledge
Uh-huh.
from the
Okay.
traditional way,
Mhm.
at the same time from the modern medicine, the way vaccine and cards are being employed. At the same time, looking at the African healing practices, both are objects of knowledge and how these complement each other.
Okay, that's, very well put. Yeah, exactly. She's looking at the objectification of knowledge in two different contexts. And she's treating them very much the same way, which I guess you caught on to. It's not like she's writing about the African method with a different tone. She's sort of describing what the African healers and what the nurses in the clinic are doing as if they're very sort of parallel actors. And so what does, actually, and I think this is, by the way, also a really good example of ethnography again. And I say this mainly because of the detail. Did you guys notice the level of detail about the African healing? I mean, it's even difficult to follow, right? I mean, what are some of the things they're doing in the African medicine? Again, this is medicine we could call preventative medicine.
Like they're taking the bark of a tree and making an amulet, putting up stuff together and tying it on their left wrist, and then shaving their head and using a piece of the umbilical cord, and I don't remember it was
Right.
and there was also like putting it near their doorway, something so that like somebody who's trying to hurt their child would fall
Yeah.
when they
Right.
cross the
Yeah.
doorway. It was extremely specific to a point. And it was not just the African healing practices or the techniques that I found that she was specific about. Even the modern medicine in the later part, she was very specific about the diaries that the nurses kept. I mean, the pamphlets or whatever, about each child and
Right.
what the measures that they took, the way to weigh the child. It was extremely specific.
Okay, extremely specific. Yeah, that's how you see the ethnographic element. Yeah, she's clearly done a lot of work with this healer, or I guess it's both a mother and daughter who are both healers, and she is able to offer this depth and level of specificity that's almost overwhelming. Like, let me just see. Page, like one's, I'll just like, just to read a little passage. Like from page 160. This is the beginning of a section called Rendering Devils. She says that 2 days after Yanini's birth, Mariamu wrapped a small bundle of medicine that included frankincense, hemp seeds, pieces of the strong-smelling mvuje tree, and slivers of roots from the nandenga and the numo kamungo trees in a piece of black cloth around Yani's left wrist. Okay, she had to actually get all the names of those things, figure them out from the healer, what she's using. Typically, small children in southeastern Tanzania wear such medicine to protect them from getting the fever of mashetani before growing up. Mashetani can startle, dirty, climb on, or otherwise harm a child, etc. So, she had to really work and record a lot of detail. I know actually from doing this from the Ayurveda mental hospital in Kottakkal. I remember there's so many Ayurvedic plants that are involved in the medicines, and I would be sitting there taking notes while this doctor would be telling me all these Sanskritic terms for things that are in the medicine. And on occasion I was able to slow down and try to figure out precisely what, get the names right and like a backup. What was that you just said? And then actually I was able to look at the charts of some people to see the prescriptions that they were giving, the Ayurvedic terms. But it's a lot of painstaking detail to gather this all very accurately, and that's part of ethnographic work. It can be very slow. It can be very difficult to get, she probably had to go repeat, a lot of stuff. But it's impressive, the level of detail. And as you guys are noticing, that she is talking about the biomedical, the clinical perspective in exactly the same way. In other words, the Tanzanian people believe in these medicines, these barks of the tree, and then you put this other stuff so that a person's, if they have aggression towards the child, that they will, fall down. But it doesn't attack the person, only attacks the behavior. This is their beliefs, this is their ideas. So when she goes to the clinic, that's discussed in the same way. These people at the clinic, here are their beliefs. They have these things called vaccines, and they understand that they do this. And she describes the biology of the vaccine as a local belief. And this goes back to the work of Byron Good in some ways, who I mentioned earlier. Kleinman and Good did that Culture and Depression volume. Byron Good, in one of his pieces, he wrote about how, anthropologists often talk about biomedicine in terms of what people know, the language of knowing, and they often talk about other forms of therapy in the language of belief. And that he challenged anthropologists to try to use the same language, and that for both cases, and that's what she's doing here. She's treating them both very much the same way. Yeah, language of belief versus language of knowledge. This doesn't mean that she's necessarily casting doubt on vaccines or anything, but she's just describing it as this is their belief system. And they create this chart, she shows you the chart and then puts these dots, and then they're trying to make sure that they regulate the body of the child to follow an idealized curve on a chart. That's what they're doing. That's not how we usually describe, infant care at an allopathic clinic. This way of working is also very much influenced by work in STS, Science and Technology Studies. And earlier in the book, she goes more into the theory, the people that she's using in STS. Is STS familiar to some of you? Like, how many feel like you've heard of Science and Technology Studies? So, it's not STEM, actually. No, it's in a way, it's not the opposite, but it's looking at STEM as a cultural practice. So it's not science, it's analyzing science for its meaning.
Very much under the purview of social science, right?
Yeah, exactly, on the purview of social and humanities. So there'll be people in literature, people in history also doing STS work. So And she's using methods from STS. Her method of describing both healing systems in very similar language is anthropological, but it's also a classic STS method that some authors, I mean, we don't have much time, so I'll just say a few things about STS. We'll hear a little bit more about it later on. Actually, Rennie Thomas, when he comes here on Friday, will actually talk about his ethnography of the laboratory that he's also been doing in addition to his work on Unani, which is a very STS sort of thing to do. So, yeah, STS, Science and Technology Studies. It's not a science, it's a field. It's interdisciplinary. It involves people in anthropology, sociology, philosophy, history, gender studies, and other fields. So it's not the scientists, although some scientists have become STS people who actually, one good example is this Banu Subramaniam. Anybody know her work? She just came out with a new book called Botany of Empire. I just saw her speak in New York a few months ago. And she was a botanist who became an STS person. She felt totally liberated when she learned about STS. She just said it wasn't an option to study. She could do sciences, but you couldn't analyze science as a cultural practice. And then she discovered feminist STS, feminist post-colonial science studies, and that made her jump for joy, and that became her future path. Just put her down here in case you don't know her. So again, STS is about so anthropologists, sociologists look at many things, right? Religion, economy, politics as social practices. This is a new thing to look at science as a social practice. It's no longer this place that's bracketed off, in a black box. Like, we don't analyze that culturally. Everything else. Same thing happened with medicine and medical anthropology. Medicine used to be outside of the scope of anthropology, and then we pulled it in. So similarly, science. And then a major figure in STS is, which she mentions early on in the chapter I gave you. And she mentions him also earlier in the book in the introduction, discussing her theory. Bruno Latour, a French, I don't know what to call him because you can't fit him in a discipline, a French STS guy, the sort of the best known of them. He's very influential in developing the methods that she's using in chapter 6 of talking about the different medicines in the same way, but also talking about things like the little book they have in the clinic that keeps the records of the patient. Like, she talks about it as like an actor. It does certain things. It has a certain power, and I'll put it up here. Actor network theory is a sort of a position coming out of STS where you look at a network of actors, but they're not all human actors. They can be non-human things too. And we're out of time for me to really explain how that works, but just you have a name at least to end on, which is one of the things that she's using in her approach. Again, you'll probably hear some more about this kind of thing from Rennie Thomas on Friday. So let's see. Okay, so what we're doing next. So we've spoken about culture, and I guess in Li Zhang, in some ways, the world of power enters into it. It's not just about Chinese values and things like that, although that's part of it. Psychology comes from a certain place. These are middle-class people, so the real social hierarchies are there. And so we have readings. Oh yeah, well, actually just 2 readings, which is good because these actually kind of take time to get through. And then I've got the film, Bending the Arc. So Foucault, Foucault is Foucault. If you haven't read him before, he can be hard to follow. Just read and just see what you do understand, and if the parts you don't understand, just ignore and keep on moving. Because nobody understands everything he says. But it's a different way of looking at power. His ideas are interesting and provocative, I think. Ida Susser's work, it's a more traditional way of looking at power. How a corporation affects the health of the community, and how to what degree people are empowered to resist or do something about changing those circumstances, from a case in Puerto Rico. And it sounds like in a way you already know this. Some of you, like what you mentioned about your research, you're showing us a group of women, for which culture is almost a quaint little thing that's hardly relevant. The forces of power are the things that are impinging upon their lives and making them have certain ranges of choices about what they can do and can't do. And I'll try to figure out how to show this film maybe in the second half of the class. It's actually, we have it through my university, through a streaming service our library has, and I'm assuming I can just go into that from here and just start the film, and it'll work. Okay, so I'll see you all then, and maybe I'll see some of you at lunch in the mess.
So it's going to be a full screening, or should we watch it and...
Oh no, so I'll do it in class. Yeah, I'll have us watch the film in class. So we can, maybe not the whole thing. I don't know if I'm able to share out the access to it, because I have to sign in through my university to get it. But anyway, we'll see it. Kind of first half we'll talk about the readings, and second half we'll view the film or part of it. Probably not time enough to see the whole thing, and maybe talk about it a little bit.